everyone, welcome back to part 2 of the Oligopoly video series on this YouTube channel. So in this video, we're going to pick up right where we left off in part 1, where we were kind of creating this example of a duopoly or an oligopoly with two firms. And the duopoly we were talking about was AT&T and Verizon. And AT&T and Verizon were providing a cell phone service plan to residents in a small town. Now, if these two firms agreed to behave like a monopoly and split the profits right down the middle between the two of them, each one of them would walk away with $900. Each one would sell 30 units each. So I pose the following questions to kind of show an example of how a lot of times these agreements to collude with one another eventually fall apart due to the nature of self-interest. So hopefully this example will kind of solidify this idea and make it a little bit more clear for you whenever we're talking about the interdependent behavior of oligopolies. So the first question I asked was, if AT&T cheats on this agreement and decides to produce 40 units, so again, they agree to produce 30 each, and if AT&T decides, hey, if I sell 10 more, I might be able to make more profit, what happens to the market price of the cell phone plan? And then what happens to AT&T's profits due to the fact that AT&T cheated on this agreement? The second question I asked was, is it in AT&T's interest to cheat on this agreement? And then the third question is, if both firms, if both AT&T and Verizon cheat on this agreement and both of them make 40 units, what happens to each one of their profits then? So let's go ahead and dive into the answers to these questions. So again, just a reminder, if both firms stick to the agreement, each firm's profit will be $900 each. What happens if AT&T breaks that agreement and produces not 30 units, but 40 units for this small town? Well, the market quantity of cell phone plans produced in this city goes from 60 to 70. So before, each firm was making 30 cell phone plans each, and 30 plus 30 is 60. And since those are the only two firms in this market, the entire market quantity was 60. But now that AT&T decided to cheat on the agreement and sell 10 more, Verizon is still selling 30, and now AT&T is selling 40. So this makes the market quantity for the cell phone plans to be 70 cell phone plans sold in this small town. So now we see that if the market quantity is 70, the price needed to sell more cell phone plans has to decrease. So if the quantity goes up, price goes down. That's the law of demand. So now the price for every single cell phone plan, regardless of if AT&T or Verizon sells the cell phone plan, goes down to $35. What does this do to AT&T's profit? So even though they're selling more, they're selling them at a slightly lower price. So to figure out what AT&T's profit will be at selling 40 units at a price of $35 each, we have to know the total revenue minus the total cost. So again, I just basically told you what total revenue would be. They're selling 40 units at a price of $35. 40 times 35 is $1,400. Now, if you go back a couple slides or to the last video, you'll know that the total cost the firm is facing, the total cost that AT&T is facing, is the quantity times 10. So the quantity that they're selling is 40 times $10. This is the marginal cost. So 40 times 10 gives you a total cost of only $400. So if AT&T decides to cheat on this agreement and sell 40 units instead of 30, their profit is $1,000. Again, we just got this by doing total revenue minus total cost. Now, if AT&T stuck to the agreement and said, okay, Verizon, I won't try to undercut you or sell more than you. I'll stick to the agreement and sell 30. AT&T would have made a profit of only $900. But AT&T knows that, if I cheat on this agreement and now sell 40, I have the opportunity to make $1,000. I have the opportunity to make a higher profit than what I would have if I stuck to the agreement. So AT&T's profits are higher if it cheats on this agreement. Leaves Verizon in the dust, you know? So it's in AT&T's best interest then to want to cheat on this agreement. So then the third question I asked is a little bit different. And it said, what if both firms cheat and produce a quantity of 40 each? What happens to each firm's profits then? So what if, not only AT&T decides to cheat on the agreement, what if separately Verizon decides to also cheat on the agreement? Because, Verizon is thinking the exact same thing that AT&T is. Verizon's thinking, okay, we have this agreement and we're both going to sell 30. I can sell 40 and make more money than what I would have if I was selling 30. So not only is AT&T possibly having this thought, but Verizon could also be having this thought at the same time. So what happens if they both cheat? What happens if instead of both of them selling 30 and making $900 in profit, what if they both sell 40? So again, what if Verizon concludes the same thing that AT&T did in the earlier answers, and that it is in, Verizon's best interest to maybe cheat on this agreement as well? Each one now produces 40 units. So before, the market quantity was 60 because each one was selling 30. Now the market quantity is 80. Both AT&T and Verizon are now flooding the market with their cell phone plans. So because there are more cell phone plans available on the market, higher quantity means a lower price. So the price that both AT&T and Verizon are able to get for their cell phone plans now is only $30 each. If they both stuck to their agreement and sold 30 cell phone plans each, the market quantity would have been 60. And they could have sold their cell phone plans for $40 each. But now that both of them have cheated and the market quantity is 80, they can only sell their cell phone plans for $30 each. So what happens to each of these firms' profit now that, they may be selling more, but now it's at an even lower price because both of them cheated. So each individual firm's profit is only going to be $800. We find each firm's profit again by doing total revenue minus total cost, what we've been doing. Total revenue for one firm, let's just say AT&T, would be 40 times the $30 that they're selling each of these plans at. So the total revenue that one firm is bringing in is $1,200. The total cost, again, is going to be the quantity that they sell times 10, which was the marginal cost. So 40 times 10 gives us 400 for their total cost. So if you do total revenue minus total cost, you get a profit of $800. So AT&T makes $800 and Verizon makes $800 if they both cheat on this agreement. So if they both stuck to the agreement, they would have made $900 each. But if both of them cheat, they only make $800 each. But we found out from, this previous, two answers that it is in, these firms' best interests individually to want to cheat on the agreement. So if AT&T is the only one that cheats on the agreement, they have the opportunity to make higher profit, which we found in question 1. If Verizon is the only one to cheat on the agreement, then they have the opportunity to make a higher profit. But if both of them cheat, they both end up with lower profits than if they would have stuck to the agreement. So again, both firms would be better off if they stuck to the cartel agreement. But each firm has that incentive to want to cheat on the agreement. So what is the lesson that we can learn from this example? Well, it's difficult for oligopoly firms to form cartels and honor their agreements because that temptation to cheat is very high in these sort of situations because there are only one or maybe two competitors that you're competing with. Okay, so let's go through another example here to kind of figure out what the oligopoly equilibrium looks like. So we saw, in the last example that it seems like a pretty, up in the air, wild thing that's happening that, AT&T's profits are totally dependent on Verizon's decisions and Verizon's profits are totally dependent on AT&T's decisions. So how is there an equilibrium? How is there a balance that works its way into this kind of market structure? And hopefully with this little example, we'll see that we'll find an equilibrium where things kind of level out, where both firms do not have the incentive to change their behavior. Okay, so if each firm decides to produce the quantity of 40, this means that the total market quantity is going to be 80. So AT&T makes 40, Verizon makes 40, this makes 80 total. Given the demand schedule of this small town, for a quantity of 80, the price is going to be 30. And we learned from the last question that each firm's profit is going to be $800. Is there, any kind of incentive? Is it in AT&T's best interest to try to increase this output further? They've already moved from 30 to 40. Is it in their best interest to go from, let's say, 40 to 50? And what about Verizon? Is it in Verizon's interest to increase its output to 50 from 40. So again, if each firm produces a quantity of 40, then each firm's profit is going to be $800. So let's just say if only AT&T, again, decides to increase its output from 40 to 50, this means the market quantity goes from 80 total to 90 total. With a quantity of 90, we know the market price is going to be $25. So again, the price with the higher quantity goes down even more. And AT&T's profit, if they increase their quantity from 40 to 50, actually goes down. Before they were making $800, and if they increase the quantity again, they'll only make $750 if you do all the math with the total revenue minus the total cost again. So given this example, AT&T's profits are higher at the quantity of 40 than they are at the quantity of 50. So AT&T, at this point, they don't really have an incentive to want to increase the quantity anymore. We can do the same exact thing and we'll find the same exact numbers if we do it for Verizon. So it kind of reached this point where if we were at 30, there existed this incentive to increase from 30 to 40. The fact that we were selling more units kind of overweighed the fact that we were selling them for a lower price. There was this incentive to want to cheat on the agreement and sell more, even though we were selling them at a slightly lower price. Moving from 40 to 50, this incentive goes away for both of the firms because they find that by selling more, it doesn't cover the fact that they're not bringing in as much revenue anymore. Their profits start to decrease. So we kind of call this situation where both AT&T and Verizon have agreed to stick to producing 40 each. We call this outcome a Nash equilibrium. So a Nash equilibrium is a term that's used in game theory. The next video in the series is going to go more in depth into game theory and some of the terminology that is used when talking about game theory. If you've seen the movie A Beautiful Mind, you know the main character in that movie is John Nash. This Nash equilibrium is actually named after him because he was the one that discovered it, which is kind of cool. But essentially, a Nash equilibrium is economic actors interacting with one another, each choosing their best strategy, given the strategies that all other actors have chosen. So a Nash equilibrium is not only relevant for this one particular example, we can use a Nash equilibrium to describe a whole bunch of different behaviors, and we'll go into that in more detail in the next video. But in this example, we found that both AT&T and Verizon choosing to produce a quantity of 40, we found that to be a Nash equilibrium. That it is in AT&T's best interest to produce a quantity of 40, given the fact that Verizon is also going to produce 40. And it's in Verizon's best interest to want to produce 40, given the fact that AT&T is also going to produce a quantity of 40. So again, this is just a little preview for some of the stuff that we're going to be going into in the next video. So keep this Nash equilibrium, this interdependent behavior stuff in the back of your head and save it for the next video. So I'm just going to kind of summarize and end this video with some basic conclusions that you can kind of draw on for oligopolies. So what does the price and what does the quantity really look like for oligopoly? I know we spent a lot of time for the other three market structures really diving into, how these firms choose the price and choose the quantity given their marginal revenues, marginal costs, the demand curve, etc. But with oligopoly, it's a little bit more complicated in that, choosing the quantity and the price depends on everyone else that you're in potential competition with. So it's not as straightforward as the other three market structures. But in general, you can say that an oligopoly produces a quantity that is greater than what a single monopoly would, but it doesn't produce as much as a perfectly competitive market. And the same kind of thing with the price. The price is going to be a little bit lower than what a monopoly would charge, but it's still going to be higher than what perfect competition would charge. So an oligopoly is going to fall somewhere, in between these two market structure extremes. But depending on what all other firms in this oligopoly decide to do, really determines what the price is going to be and what the quantity is going to be. So the next video is going to dive into game theory a little bit more in depth, and we're going to re-explain or re-go through some more examples of different types of games that economists and mathematicians can look at to kind of analyze and predict how certain people, how certain businesses, how certain countries are going to behave, given the fact that they also have to consider the behavior of other individuals, other businesses, and other countries in their decision-making processes.